shrugged his shoulders. I cannot say, but it is suggestive. A wild idea flashed across me. Was it possible that Mrs. Inglethorpe's mind was deranged? Had some fantastic idea of demoniacal possession? And if that were so, was it not also possible that she might have taken her own life? I was about to expound these theories to Poirot when his own words distracted me. Come, he said, now to examine the coffee cups. My dear Poirot, what on earth is the good of that, now that we know about the cocoa? Oh la la, that miserable cocoa, cried Poirot flippantly. He laughed with apparent enjoyment, raising his arms to heaven in mock despair. In what I could not but consider the worst possible taste. And anyway, I said, with increasing coldness, as Mrs. Inglethorpe took her coffee upstairs with her, I do not see what you expect to find, unless you consider it likely that we shall discover a packet of strychnine on her coffee tray. Poirot was sobered at once. Come, my friend, he said, slipping his arms through mine. Ne vous fâchez pas. Allow me to interest myself in my coffee cups, and I will respect your cocoa. There. Is it a bargain? He was so quaintly humorous that I was forced to laugh, and we went together to the drawing room, where the coffee cups and tray remained undisturbed as we had left them. Poirot made me recapitulate the scene of the night before, listening very carefully and verifying the position of the various cups. So Mrs. Cavendish stood by the tray and poured out. Yes. Then she came across to the window where you sat with Mademoiselle Cynthia. Yes. Here are the 3 cups. And the cup on the mantelpiece half drunk, that would be Mr. Lawrence Cavendish's. And the one on the tray, John Cavendish's. I saw him put it down there. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But where then is the cup of Mr. Inglethorpe? He does not drink coffee. He does not drink coffee. Then all are accounted for. One moment, my friend. With infinite care, he took a drop or two from the grounds in each cup, sealing them up in separate test tubes, tasting each in turn as he did so. His physiognomy underwent a curious change. An expression gathered there that I can only describe as half puzzled and half relieved. Bien, he said, at last. It is evident. I had an idea, but clearly I was mistaken. Yes, altogether I was mistaken. Yet it is strange, but no matter. And with a characteristic shrug, he dismissed whatever it was that was worrying him from his mind. I could have told him from the beginning that this obsession of his over the coffee was bound to end in a blind alley, but I restrained my tongue. After all, though he was old, Poirot had been a great man in his day. Breakfast is ready, said John Cavendish, coming in from the hall. You will breakfast with us, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot agreed. I observed John. Already he was almost restored to his normal self. The shock of the events of the last night had upset him temporarily, but his equable poise soon swung back to the normal. He was a man of very little imagination, in sharp contrast with his brother, who had perhaps too much. Ever since the early hours of the morning, physician for all of us. Of course, one has to treat him as usual, but hang it all, one's gorge does rise as sitting down to eat with a possible murderer. Poirot nodded sympathetically. I quite understand. It is a very difficult situation for you, Mr. Cavendish. I would like to ask you one question. Mr. Inglethorpe's reason for not returning last night. I believe that he forgot the latchkey. Is not that so? Yes. I suppose you are quite sure that the latchkey was forgotten, that he did not take it after all. I have no idea. I never thought of looking. We always keep it in the hall drawer. I'll go and see if it's there now. Poirot held up his hand with a faint smile. No, no, Mr. Cavendish. Is it too late now? It is too late now. I am certain that you would find it. If Mr. Inglethorpe did take it, he has had ample time to replace it by now. But do you think? I think nothing. If anyone had a chance to look this morning before he returned and seen it there, it would have been a valuable point in his favor. That is all. John looked perplexed. Do not worry, said Poirot smoothly. I assure you that you need not let it trouble you. Since you are so kind, let us go and have some breakfast. Everyone was assembled in the dining room. Under the circumstances, we were naturally not a cheerful party. The reaction after a shock is always trying, and I think we were all suffering from it. Decorum and good breathing naturally enjoined that our demeanor should be as much usual, and I could not help wondering if this self-control was really a matter of great difficulty. There were no red eyes, no signs of greatly indulging. I found that I was right in my position, that Dorcas was the person most affected by the personal side of the tragedy. I passed over Alfred Inglethorpe, who acted the bereaved widower in a manner that I felt to be disgusting in its hypocrisy. Did he know that we suspected him? I wondered. Surely he could not be aware of the fact that concealed it as he would. Did he feel some secret stirring of fear, or was he confident that this crime would go unpunished? Surely the suspicion in the atmosphere must warn him that he was already a marked man. But did everyone suspect him? What about Mrs. Cavendish? I watched her as she sat at the head of the table, graceful, composed, enigmatic, in her soft gray frock with white ruffles at the wrists falling over her slender hands. She looked very beautiful when she chose, however. Her face could be sphinx-like in its inscrutability. She was very silent, hardly opening her lips, and yet in some queer way I felt that the great strength of her personality was dominating us all. She looked very tired and ill, I thought. The heaviness and languor of her manner were very marked. You are feeling ill, she answered frankly. Yes, I've got the most beastly headache. And have another cup of coffee, mademoiselle, said Poirot. rose immediately. "Show him into my study." Then he turned to us. "My mother's lawyer," he explained, and in a lower voice, he is also the coroner, you understand. "Perhaps you would like to come with me." We acquiesced and followed him out of the room. John strode on ahead, and I took the opportunity of whispering to Poirot, "There will be an inquest then." Poirot nodded absently. He seemed absorbed in thought and not much speculation. voice with some curiosity. Poirot smiled. No. Then why did you ask? Hush. John Cavendish had turned to Poirot. Will you come with us, Monsieur Poirot? We are going through my mother's papers. Mr. Inglethorpe is quite willing to leave it entirely to Mr. Wells and myself. Which simplifies matters very much, murmured the lawyer. As technically, of course, he was entitled. He did not finish the sentence. We will look through the desk in the boudoir first, explained John, and go to her bedroom afterwards. She kept her most important papers in a purple dispatch case, which we must look through carefully. Yes, said the lawyer, it is quite possible that there may be a later will than the one in my possession. There is a later will. There is a later will. It was Poirot who spoke. What? John and the lawyer looked at him startled. Or rather, pursued my friend imperturbably, there was one. What do you mean, there was one? Where is it now? Burnt. Burned. Yes. See here. He took out the charred fragment we found on the grate in Miss Inglethorpe's room and handed it to the lawyer with a brief explanation of when and where he had found it. But possibly this is an old will. I don't think so. In fact, I'm almost certain that it was made no earlier than yesterday afternoon. What? Impossible! Broke simultaneously from both men. Poirot turned to John. You will allow me to send for your gardener. I will prove it to you. Oh, of course, but I don't see. Poirot raised his hand. Do as I ask you. Afterwards, you shall question as much as you please. Very well. He rang the bell. Dorcas answered in a due course. Dorcas, will you tell Manning to come around and speak to me here? Yes, sir. Dorcas withdrew. We waited in a tense silence. Poirot alone seemed perfectly at ease, and dusted a forgotten corner of a bookcase. The clumping of hobnailed boots on the gravel outside proclaimed the approach of Manning. John looked questioningly at Poirot. The latter nodded. Come inside, Manning, said John. I want to speak to you. Manning came closely and hesitantly through the French window and stood as near it as he could. I just need to drink some water. Pardon me. He held his cap in his hands, twisting it very carefully round and round. His back, which was much bent, though he was probably not as old as he looked, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent, and belied his slow and rather cautious speech. Manning, said John, this gentleman will put some questions to you which I want you to answer. Yes, sir, mumbled Manning. Poirot stepped forward briskly. Manning's eye swept over him with a faint contempt. You were planting a bed of begonias round by the south side of the house yesterday afternoon, were you not, Manning? Yes, sir, me and Willem. And Mrs. Inglethorpe came to the window and called you, did she not? Yes, sir, she did. Tell me in your own words exactly what happened after that. Well, sir, nothing much. She just told Willem to go on his bicycle down to the village and bring back a poor will, or such like. I don't know what exactly. She wrote it down for him. Well, he did, sir. And what happened next? We went on with the begonias, sir. Did not Mrs. Inglethorpe call you again? Yes, sir. Both me and Willem she called. And then she made us come right in and sign our names on the bottom of a long paper under where she'd signed. Did you see anything of what was written above the signature? Asked Poirot sharply. should have made a will on the very day of her death. Mr. Wells cleared his throat and remarked dryly, "Are you sure it is a coincidence, Cavendish?" "What do you mean?" "Your mother, you tell me, had a violent quarrel with someone yesterday afternoon." "What do you mean?" cried John again. There was a tremor in his voice, and he had gone very pale. "In consequence of that quarrel, your mother very suddenly and hurriedly makes a new will. The contents of that will we shall never know. She told no one of its provisions. This morning, no doubt, she would have consulted me on the subject, but she had no chance. The will disappears, and she takes its secret with her to her grave." Cavendish. "I much fear there is no coincidence there. Monsieur Poirot, I am sure you agree with me that the facts are suggestive." "Suggestive or not," interrupted John, "we are most grateful to Monsieur Poirot for elucidating the matter. But for him we should never have known of this will. I suppose I may not ask you, monsieur, what first led you to suspect the fact?" Poirot smiled and answered, "A scribbled over old envelope and a freshly planted bed of begonias." John, I think, would have pressed his questions further, but at that moment the loud purr of a motor was audible, and we all turned to the window as it swept past. "Evie," cried John. "Excuse me, Wells." He went hurriedly out into the hall. Poirot looked inquiringly at me. "Miss Howard," I explained. "Ah, I am glad she has come. There is a woman with a head and a heart too, Hastings, though the good God gave her no beauty." I followed John's example and went out into the hall, where Miss Howard was endeavoring to extricate herself from the voluminous mass of veil that enveloped her head. As her eyes fell on me, a sudden pang of guilt shot through me. This was the woman who had warned me so earnestly, and to whose warning I had at last paid no heed, and how soon and how contemptuously I had dismissed it from my mind. Now that she had been proved justified in so tragic a manner, I felt ashamed. She had known Alfred Inglethorpe only too well. I wondered whether, if she had remained at Styles, the tragedy would have taken place, or would the man have feared her watchful eye. I was relieved when she took me by the hand, with her well-remembered painful grip. The eyes that met mine were sad, but not reproachful. That she had been crying bitterly, I could tell by the redness of her eyelids, but her manner was unchanged from its old gruffness. "Started the moment I got the wire. Just come off night duty. Hired car. Quickest way to get here." "Have you had anything to eat this morning, Evie?" she replied gruffly. Hanging's too good for him. Ought to be drawn and quartered like in the good old times. We are at one then, said Poirot, for I too want to hang the criminal. Alfred Inglethorpe, him or another. No question of another. Poor Emily was never murdered until he came along. I don't say she wasn't surrounded by sharks. She was. But it was only her birth they were after. Her life was safe enough. But along comes Alfred Inglethorpe, and within 2 months, hey, presto. Believe me, Miss Howard, said Poirot very earnestly, if Mr. Inglethorpe is the man, he shall not escape me. On my honor, I will hang him as high as Haman. That's better, said Miss Howard more enthusiastically, but I must ask you to trust me. Now your help may be very valuable to me. I will tell you why. Because in all of this house of mourning, yours are the only eyes that have wept. Miss Howard blinked, and a new note crept into the gruffness of her voice. If you mean that I was fond of her, yes, I was. You know, Emily was a selfish old woman in her way. She was very generous, but she always wanted a return. She never let people forget what she had done for them, and that way she missed love. Don't think she ever realized it though, or felt the lack of it. Hope not anyway. I was on a different footing. I took my stand from the start. So many pounds a year I'm worth to you. Well and good, but not a penny pieces besides, not a pair of gloves, nor a theater ticket. She didn't understand, was very offended sometimes. Said I was foolishly proud. It wasn't that, but I couldn't explain. Anyway, I kept my self-respect, and so, out of the whole bunch, I was the only one who could allow myself to be fond of her. I watched over her. I guarded her from a lot of them, and then a clip-tongued scoundrel comes along, and pooh, all my years of devotion go for nothing. I understand, mademoiselle. I understand all you feel. It is most natural. You think that we are lukewarm, that we lack fire and energy. But trust me, it is not so. John stuck his head in at this juncture and invited us both to come up to Mrs. Inglethorpe's room. As he and Mr. Wells had finished looking through the desk in the boudoir. As we went up the stairs, John looked back to the dining room door and lowered his voice confidentially. Look here, what's going to happen when these two meet? I shook my head helplessly. I've told Mary to keep them apart if she can. Will she be able to do so? The Lord only knows. There's one thing, Inglethorpe himself won't be too keen on meeting her. You've got the key still, haven't you, Poirot? I asked, as we reached the door of the locked room. Taking the keys from Poirot, John unlocked it, and we all passed in. The lawyer went straight to the desk, and John followed him. I think I will stop here for now, as this is a very long chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I was able to relax you, hopefully put you to sleep. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're still awake. If not, do it when you wake up. And I hope to see you guys again soon. Have a great